on today's StoryBeat.
My friend, Anthony McCartan, he wrote The Theory of Everything. He wrote Bohemian Rhapsody, the biopic. I was telling him about the story of my house. And there was a guy who had this duel and all this crazy stuff that had happened back in the early 1800s. And he says, I want you to write that. I'm like, you're mad. You've lost your ever-loving mind. Now, we have had way too many cocktails, okay? I'm like, oh, sure you will. And then the next morning, we saw him at one of the films, and he said, listen, I may not make a screenplay out of it because, I don't have any control over that. He said, but you write it and I'll help you. So I did.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, best-selling historical fiction author Sharon Virts, is a successful entrepreneur and visionary who, after more than 25 years in business, followed her passion for storytelling. She's received numerous accolades for her commitment to historic preservation, earning national recognition for both her business achievements and philanthropic endeavors. Beyond her business acumen, Sharon is a gifted visual artist, intertwining her artistic expression with extraordinary storytelling to breathe life into intricate characters and vivid settings that captivate the heart and ignite the imagination. She's authored 2 best-selling novels, Masque of Honor and Veil of Doubt. Sharon's latest book, The Grays of Truth, was recently published. I've read The Grays of Truth and can tell you I was immediately swept up by this suspenseful historical murder mystery set in 1867 antebellum Baltimore, where some of the city's elite suffer mysterious deaths amid a backdrop of scandal. If you like historical thrillers, I highly urge you to check out The Grays of Truth. So for all those reasons and many more, it's a great honor for me to welcome the outstanding historical novelist Sharon Virts to StoryBeat today. Sharon, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Steve. I'm just so looking forward to having our chat today.
Well, I'm grateful to have you along. So let's go way back in time. What were your earliest inspirations and influences that got you into the business of writing books?
So I have always loved to read. I've always loved to write since I was like little, so little. I was reading, 5 years old and started keeping a journal when I was 6 and I just enjoy writing. I always have. My father and my grandmother were both storytellers. My dad had an 8th grade education, but that didn't stop him from telling the wildest yarns about who lived here and what happened there. Always sort of a blend of history of the area that we lived in and the crazy people that lived in this house or lived in that house or did this with some horse. And I think that really had a huge impact on me, that sort of appreciation of history, but not so much, the 1492, the Columbus sailed the ocean blue kind of thing, but more of the people who actually lived someplace or did something and their stories, and not necessarily famous people, but just average people like you or like me. It's really had a huge impact on first off, how I see the world, and secondly, in the stories that I tell.
Is that you are always looking for stories that have actually happened to real people?
Absolutely. All of my novels so far, the 3 that I have written and the 2 that I'm working on now, are all based on true stories that really happened in real life. Usually all of them so far are in the 19th century.
And how old were you when you started to not write these novels, but first start to write? You say you were a young person, a little girl. What age?
Oh, so I was, like I said, I was reading around 5. I kept a journal. Actually, it's very funny. I still have it. It's a small little, oh my gosh, it looks like the size of an index card, and I
Right.
have, it rained today. I played outside, that kind of thing, since I was like in 1st grade. So
So you were recording things from really early on.
And I still keep a journal to this day. I mean, when I die, I don't know, maybe I should go through them before that happens and throw the ones out or pull the pages out I don't want my kids to read. But I mean, I have hundreds of journals all over the place. And by the way, they're not organized any particular date or anything. They're just everywhere in boxes, in the basement, in my bookshelves. I have them all over the place.
Do you journal while you're figuring out what the novel's going to be, whatever your book's going to be?
Right. So I journal in my own life every day. I believe that we are all our own historians. If we don't tell our own stories, who's going to tell those, right? And so,
That's true.
and I encourage all my followers on social media and my newsletters, subscribers. I have a journaling challenge I give to them every month, I give away journals every week to people for different occasions, and I journal every day. Usually it's just about what I did that day or what I'm thinking about or some event that I've witnessed or just how I feel. Some days I say, what made me happy today? I ate a chocolate I probably shouldn't have had. So I wrote that down as something I enjoyed. But I believe that's an
I would
important,
write that down every day.
right? That's sweet in the evening. But I think it's a really important part of our lives to record ourselves while I'm writing. I mean, my characters, they do live in my house, in my head rent free. Um, and, I do have to, put them aside, but I don't journal about them. I journal about my own life, which I think is important for us all to do.
So now your books tend to be mysteries, correct?
Yes and no. So the last two were. The first one wasn't. It's more of a political fiction. I want to say coming of age, but that book is being turned into a series. I'm writing the second installment of that now. But they all do contain some level of murder and some level of mystery in terms of the who done it or what's about to happen next or who's responsible for this, who's really behind the scenes pulling strings. But the last two have definitely been murder mysteries, and the one that's coming out after the next one is also a murder mystery. So I kind of go back and forth.
And and how did you get into mysteries? What
Trixie
triggered that?
Belden. I don't know if you're familiar. She was a grocery store version of Nancy Drew when we were a kid. And I just loved
I
them.
remember who
Remember
Trixie
Trixie
Belden
Belden?
is.
Oh my goodness.
I remember that. I don't think I ever read them. I read the Hardy
It's
Boys, but
same thing,
but I
right?
know who the name
But
is.
I just
Yeah.
love a good story, and for me, it's finding those real stories and then finding them sort of in the area where I sort of live or close to where I live. So my followers, which are concentrated, many of them in the Virginia, Maryland, that sort of area, Pennsylvania. I have a lot of fans in Philadelphia, so that people can relate to the places that I write about. So, for example, I do walking tours in our town on my second book, Veil of Doubt, and I'll start at the church and walk all the way through town and show them where in real life these characters lived. And sometimes I change their names, sometimes not, depending on how much I change how they were in real life. But I love that sort of integration of, the murder mystery and place and time, sense of time and setting all into the package.
And so your bio says that you were in business for 25 years. What did you do?
When I was 29 years old, I started my own government consulting company, and
Oh,
I sold it in 2017. I was what? Oh my gosh, 2007, we had, I think it was, I don't know, 50 employees or something, not very many. And I sold it in 2017. I had 5,000 employees. We ran
wow.
this country's back office adjudication support for our country's legal immigration system.
Really?
Yeah, I had 127 offices nationwide. And so I sold in
Wow.
2017 and said, I never want to do it again. I want to, really live my life in terms of what I love to do, which is to write and to paint. And I have a small
W-
gallery in our hometown, and I spend every day writing at least 4 hours.
At least 4 hours, and you paint every day too?
I wish I had the time to do that, but no. I go on hiatuses. I'll paint for a couple days straight, and then I won't paint for a couple weeks. I just don't have the time.
So clearly you know how to build a business. That's obvious. Did that influence the way that you think about how to write?
Yes and no. So, a lot of how I sort of built my business was I was unbelievably very good at writing proposals and figuring out what customers wanted and how to present our business case to them in a way in which, answered and addressed their underlying needs, problems, hopes, fears, what keep them up at night. That sort of, we used to call the agita factor, but gives them heartburn. And so how do you solve that? And
I
then I also learned how to
Sure.
put 10 pounds of information in a 2-pound bag, because in the government proposal area, you only have so many pages you're allowed to write. You can only submit a proposal of 10 pages or 100 pages or whatever their page limitations are. So when I go before my editors now and they don't like something, I don't really get upset. It's like, okay, I'd rather do it right, and there's no pride in authorship here. If it stinks, then tell me it stinks, and then I'll rewrite it. But so I learned that discipline from that. The other part of what and how to honestly, sort of that character arc, but how to get into people's heads and how to convey a message that addresses that agita, that pain, that what keeps them up at night. So when you do that with a character, what's his real pain? What keeps him up at night? And then how do you evoke that through the written word, when you're trying to let the reader feel that same thing? It's sort of, I don't know if that makes any sense.
You have to learn how to be concise in any kind of writing.
And then also in the business sense, well, in the company sense, is that I had a lot of folks that were mail clerks and records clerks and file clerks and data entry clerks. I mean, this is not adjudication supports, all that back office stuff, right? And fee collections, and doing the research, looking for fraud in employment, and looking for fraud and trafficking kind of patterns and things like that. And so, but what I would do is I would explain to people, sort of like everybody's job is so important. Even if you're in the mailroom, if you lose a piece of mail that holds the application of some guy that wants to go work, on a ship, getting his merchant mariner's license, or they want to come to their family wants to come to this country because they're being persecuted, and you misplace, misfile, lose something, a benefit delayed is a benefit denied. And I would tell those stories about what the impact was of their carelessness, or them not caring about what they did, or them thinking that their job wasn't important. Every job was important. Everybody has a purpose in life. And I think Martin Luther King said it, if you're going to be a street sweeper, then be the best street sweeper you can be. And I sort of had that same
Absolutely.
approach to running a business. But through those telling of stories, what they did impacted a person, a constituent in their lives. And telling those stories, I also learned how to tell those stories in my writing, right? Everything a character does in a story has to have impact, has to have meaning, whether it's intentional or not. And so details matter. And when you read my stories, and if you've read Gray's, there's not a single person that doesn't have an impact on that story that I introduced in terms of characters.
Absolutely.
And if you can figure out in the first chapter why Rebecca Ketchum died, then you've solved the problem. But it's up front, and then you have to unwind it as you go. And I think, those lessons I have from running that business in terms of the importance of details and people, and how everything needs to tie together neatly, it really made a difference. On the business side, yeah, and
That's
on the business
fascinating.
side
Yeah.
too, I've learned the publishing business is so chaotic. I mean, it's so antiquated. I'm used to having metrics that I can evaluate performance, and if I wiggle this knob, this over here is going to happen, right? And in the publishing area, if I run an ad, or the publisher runs an ad, you don't get the results back in terms of the impact for like 3 months in terms of sales. And so it's really kind of hard to have cause and effect. So I do get frustrated on that business side, because I can't run good analytics to understand what drives the sale of a novel, or an ebook, or the audio. It's just not as data
Well, I would
driven.
say that's rather uncommon for an author to even be thinking about that. But you come from that world of business where those metrics are important, and so they remain important to you
And
as you
I'm
do this
sure I make
business.
my publisher crazy with
But
that when I ask these questions.
I, no doubt you do. Were you, while you were in business, were you writing short stories or pieces of things, or were you gathering
No, no.
information
I
or anything
always
like that?
thought it's interesting. I knew that when I retired. I was 54 when I retired, if you will call that retiring. And I always knew I was going to write. I was going to be an author, but I thought I was going to write a book about how some 29-year-old brat, builds a company as big as I did, and teaching other women how to survive in a predominantly male-oriented world. And I thought I was going to write one of those sort of how-to help books. And it didn't work out that way. I left. I retired. We sold the company in June of what was the year? 2017. Sorry, it's been a while. I sort of didn't do a whole lot, but I sit on the board of this film festival, and so that fall we had the film festival in Middleburg, and my friend Anthony McCartan. I don't know if you know who Anthony is. He's a screenwriter. He wrote
I know that
The
name.
Theory of Everything. He wrote Bohemian Rhapsody, the biopic,
Yes.
Two Popes, The Darkest Hour. He's just a fabulous guy. And so
Yes.
he and I are, and I'll tell some secrets out of school. We were sitting in a bar. It was late at night. And and my husband and I were with him, and I was telling him about the story of my house. We bought this old historic home, it was part of the Mason family, and restored it. And there was a guy who had this duel and all this crazy stuff that had happened back in the early 1800s. And he says, "I want you to write that." I'm like, "You're mad. You've lost your ever loving mind." And he said, "Oh, you can do it. Come on, Cher, you do it. I'll make a screenplay." Now we have had way too many cocktails. Okay. I'm like, "Oh, sure you will." And then the next morning, we saw him at one of the films, and he said, "Listen, um, I may not make a screenplay out of it because I don't have any control over that." He said, "But you write it, and I'll help you." So I did. I started researching, and I put pen to paper for the first time in February of 2018. And he helped me with just some basic structure. I mean, I didn't know what a character arc was, honestly. I mean, I have an engineering
Hmm.
engineering degree. I have nothing about anything about any English stuff. But anyway, he really did.
I've got news for you, Sharon. Most writers don't know anything about a character arc
Right.
either. So
But anyway, he helped me with it, and gave me a lot of advice, and then did the edit on the prologue, which I really appreciate him doing. And also, when he went through and did a quick read, he cut most of my introductory chapters, introductory paragraphs on every chapter. He says, "It's too much writing," So that's how I started.
So that's very interesting. Was there a point as you were going along, including with his help, that you actually thought to yourself, "You know what? I am pretty good at this." Did you have that
Well, I'm just
epiphany at any
humble
point?
that way. I do like some of I'm good at dialogue. And so what I will do is I read some of the stuff I've written and I give it to my husband. I say, "Oh, look at this dialogue. Look at this conversation." So I get excited about dialogue. I don't like transitions. I don't like descriptions. I do it because you have to, but I actually outline a book in dialogue. I have the conversations in my head. I can see the people saying the words. And so I just write down what they're saying to each other as I do an annotated outline of the whole story. Most of my annotations are just bits of dialogue. And most people don't write that way. I write really strangely, I guess. But I write like I paint. I paint what I see. I don't interpret it. I just see something and I paint it the way I see it. And then I use colors that you probably shouldn't use to do things. I use a lot of, I don't cut my colors. And I'll paint a mountain green if I want, or blue or purple or pink or whatever. And storytelling, I write what I see, I write what I hear. So in my head, it plays like a movie as I'm crafting the story.
You ought to think about becoming a screenwriter as well.
I don't even know how to start. I wouldn't even know
Well,
what to do.
trust me when I tell you, you can be taught and learn the mechanics of screenwriting in a few hours, but the mastery of those mechanics can take a long time. But the storytelling is the key. If you can tell a story and you already know how to tell a story, then you're like 90% there. The mechanics are the
Oh,
least part of it. Though though you have to learn those in order to sell it to people that are willing to make it.
I
But
just learned
you
the
if you're
novel bit.
but you're saying you're good at dialogue. And of course, the truth is screenwriting is a visual medium and you have to understand how to tell a story in visuals. But the dialogue part of it is really key. At least today it is, unless you're trying to figure out how to write a silent movie, which obviously you're not going to do. Um,
Anthony said to me one time, he said, "You need to write dialogue. You need to write lines that wins actors Oscars."
Absolutely correct.
So when you think about writing your book, write those lines that if an actor is going to play the character, he's going to want to say those lines, and those lines are going to win him an Academy Award.
And
So that's how I think of it,
if you're looking for a star, you absolutely want to be sure they're there on the last page.
right?
You don't
Well,
want to
hopefully
kill them off halfway through.
When you read Grays of Truth, you saw some of that dialogue and some of those
I did.
exchanges.
I did, and in fact, I think that would make a marvelous movie or even a series. So,
Oh,
a limited series. So, you just have to figure out how to get that put together or get Anthony McCartan to write it for you, which would be
I'll
very
call Anthony.
helpful.
Yeah, Anthony.
You never know. Sometimes that's what happens, especially if you're friends with him. So, let's talk about the Grays of Truth in detail. Um, tell the listeners what the story is about, really
So
about.
it yes, so it is it like you said when you opened up, it's set from 1867 to about 1871. It is based on a true story of a woman who believes her sister-in-law is killing off members of the family. And she is telling people, she's telling her brothers, she's telling her sister, she's telling individuals that these deaths that are happening in this house in Baltimore are suspicious, and they're murders. They're not just random illnesses. And no one believes her. And no one believes her because she spent time in an institution for debility. And debility back then is code word for crazy. So if you couldn't get out of bed in the morning, you were suffering from debility. If you were anxious, then you were hysterical. But for the most part, she was suffering from debility, which was maybe depression, but who knows? And because she had spent time in an institution, no one believes her. So the book really does go into sort of the tragedy of this woman's life. Some of it's made up, some of it's not. What I do know about her, but a lot of it has to deal with her own struggle with her own sanity, trying to unwind who's responsible for these murders or these deaths, and even questioning herself as to whether she could be responsible. At least you, as a reader, might think that for a bit. So that's kind of what it's about. And the rivalry between these women, the nastiness that goes on, is based on some things I read that happened in real life, and some things I experienced at one of my ex husband's um, family dinners. So some of the scenes I could relate to.
How did you come upon this story? How'd you find it?
So it came from my second book. So my second book, Veil of Doubt, is about a woman who went on trial for the murder of her four children, her husband, and her aunt. And during her trial, the chemist, the forensic scientist, if you will, with the guy who did the postmortem analysis on the body of that little girl in the first in Veil of Doubt, he is the same forensic psychologist or chemist, Dr. William Tonry, in Grays of Truth. So when I was researching that book and putting the first book together, Veil of Doubt, together, I stumbled upon Tonry and I said, he's an interesting guy. And then in the trial testimony, the Wharton trial was mentioned as part of the testimony he was giving in the Veil of Doubt trial, the Emily
Right,
Lloyd
right.
trial. So I so he's an interesting guy. Let me research him. I love research. My goodness, Stephen, if I could spend all day on the computer in the library researching stories. I'm like I go down rabbit holes. I get distracted. I need Adderall or something to keep me straight. But it's one of those things, you're all over the place. So I went and when I learned about him, which is really kind of cool, and it came up a little bit in Gray's, he married Anna Surratt. Anna Surratt was the daughter of Mary Surratt. Mary Surratt is the woman that was hanged for her involvement in the assassination plot on President Lincoln's life. And once he married her, within 5 days of his marriage to Anna Surratt, he was fired from the Surgeon General's office. He was ostracized from Washington, D.C., and he moved to Baltimore. And so I thought, oh, what other cases has he worked on? And I haven't really found any other than this particular one that I thought was really interesting. But that's how I found the story. And then when I found out that it had all the characteristics I love in a good story, had a dysfunctional family with a lot of money, love dysfunction and money, had a lot of murders that you couldn't explain, had a lot of unsavory characters that, any one of them could be involved, and you had motive for murder amongst a lot of them in real life, and a botched up investigation, and a thwarted, a trial that went all over the place. It's my kind of story. Yeah, I mean, who doesn't love that in real life?
So I had never heard of this story before I read your book, and so I guess the further question about research was there a lot of material about them available to you?
Well, thank God for the Baltimore Gazette at the time, which I think might be the Baltimore Sun now, but thank goodness. And so there was a lot of articles online that you can get through newspapers.com, and also there was somebody wrote or pulled together a little booklet of trial notes that you could buy on Amazon if you really search on those old archive stuff on that Wharton case. So I bought that. So it had just a lot of the clippings of newspaper, no story written, it's just the clippings of newspaper articles. And then the police chief, a guy named Jacob Fry, had um, written an autobiography. And I found that somewhere somehow. I just was searching on random people and I said that he had a autobiography written. And so there was a section in his autobiography that talked about this trial, and a lot of what Mrs. Wharton, Ellen Wharton, did to try to bribe him during this trial, and how he suspected her all throughout the whole thing before, and he was thwarted from arresting her. He also gave a lot of input in terms of the gangs and the influence of the gangs in Baltimore at the time. If you've ever seen the movie The Gangs of New York,
Yes.
after the gangs of Baltimore were purged for the most part from Baltimore, they moved to New York. So it's the same gangs, they just moved. The Pug Uglies, and I mean, they had some horrible names. I can't remember what they all were at this point, but Bloody Tubs. So all those pieces together. And then, so what I do, my method is, so I research and research and I find all this data, and then I come up with some really key characters, right? Characters that I think are going to be really important to the story. And I put them on these colored Post-it notes, and I write down different events, when they were born, whatever. And then I put them on a wall, timeline. And then I see how things go and whose stories are developing, and then sort of develop a story from that. It's a really weird process.
And are you constructing a story in your head or on paper as you're researching?
Yeah. I mean, I can feel it. I can see it, right? The hardest part is to tell, well, when you have all these dysfunctional people, you got to figure out who's going to have the best arc, who's going to go from point A to point B with a lot of drama in between. And so that helps you pick your protagonist, or at least your lead character. At
Hmm.
first, I thought it was going to be the police chief. I thought, how can I take him through this? 'Cause I know it certainly couldn't be one of the victims, 'cause I can't kill off a
Because he
victim.
would he would naturally be the person to solve a murder mystery.
And so I thought it was going to be him. He was a really interesting character. And when my husband and I were talking about the story, he said, "Hey, why don't you do a series on this guy?" And I'm like, "Oh, for God's sake, this is a police crime thing." But when I learned about Jane Grey Wharton, all the people that were being killed were around her, either related to her, and so I just sort of felt in love with her. It's the first time I've written a female protagonist, so it was a little, more difficult for me to do, and I didn't
Why?
know,
Why was it more
because
difficult to
I've
write a
never,
female?
I've always written, the last two books were before that were written from the male point of view, and I guess as having come up through business and having, been so tough in my life, I had a hard time trying to relate to someone who was, I guess, not as loud spoken, quieter. And there's less information about women out there. And I like to try to stay true to their character. And it would be harder for me to research. But then I realized I'm going to have to make some stuff up, which is the first time I really had to do that. I mean, for the most part, I've kind of gone with the character's personality as they were in real life. And Jane Grey, I didn't know a lot about. So I had to do a lot of work on who she was, which is new for me.
Were you already familiar somewhat with the antebellum South and post Civil War life and that sort of thing?
Yeah. So most of my, the last two, all my books have been set in that 19th century. The Yeah, the technology, I will tell you, it's easier to write stories when you have trains and you have telegraphs than when you don't have trains and telegraphs. Because then you have to think about how you're going to get messages back and forth to people and
Yes.
how that all works. So yeah, I have a lot of, and a lot of the stories my father would tell and my grandmother would tell were about, some relative, some great grandfather who after the Civil War did this, or right during the Civil War did that. And so I have a lot of the stories, and I grew up in an area, that's pretty thick in Civil War history, and I have an interest in that period. I don't know a whole lot about, the 17th century or 16th century or the 18th century, but I do know a good deal about the 19th. I'm just
Well, are
fascinated by it.
those centuries that you want to research and do stories in?
No, I'm going to stay with 19th and early 20th, just because I like that period, and
Hmm.
it's easy. It becomes easier for me. I am a gal of little patience, so having to learn a whole new period, unless there's some compelling, great story that I want to tell there, I think I'm going to sort of stay with where I have stories. I have like 6 stories all lined up to go. I just need to have
Wow.
the time to write them all. Yeah.
Well, that's nice because
Yeah.
now you have a little confidence that you've got stuff to rely on as you're going
Yeah.
forward. What would you say is the most challenging aspect of doing research? Is it finding material? Is it actually getting to places?
I love it. There's nothing I find. I love old graveyards. Oh my goodness, they're my favorite thing. I spend a lot of time in ancestry.com, trying to. So if I'm looking at a character, I want to look at who they were in terms of who were their parents. How old were their parents when they were born? When did their parents die? What's their birth order? Um, how close were they in terms of siblings? Did siblings die? Were they a twin? Did they lose a twin? When did they get married? How old was her husband when they got married? What children? How many children did they have? Did she lose her first 3 children? All those things help me shape a character. I love it. I don't think I find anything. I love the research. I get frustrated when I can't find information.
Hmm.
Um, I get frustrated with things I don't understand. So I got a D in chemistry in college. All
Okay.
right. And so there's a lot of chemistry in this book. And
Yes.
I
It was a
really worry that I may get it wrong. So I have some friends who are chemists and friends who are pharmacists and friends who are doctors. And so I have to consult them. I guess my challenge would be getting it wrong. How do I know I've got it right or wrong other than asking people I know or people that can help me with that? So I think
Of
it's
course.
the science and not knowing what they knew or they didn't know. So for example, it's so funny. There's someone always, and they're always so sweet when they do it. I had one of my readers in the Veil of Doubt email me, and he was a mortician or a guy that does dead bodies. One of those people, a funeral
Yeah.
home
Hmm.
director, and history buff. And his name was William. And he emailed me and said, "Do you realize that in 1871, no one buried anybody in a vault under the ground? They just put the pine box in and just dropped them in the ground, and that's the way it was." And so I have a vault. I'm telling my stories out of my mistakes out of school here, but I have a vault in that story. Where they were tapping on the vault lid when they were digging up the grave, and so it was a mistake I made because I don't know, how they used to bury people exactly in 1872. So that's
Well,
my biggest fear.
you're describing the way that writers frequently have to write is you don't know what you're going to write about, and then you have to go figure it out and talk to people and research. And do you also go to these locations and spend time there?
Oh yes. Oh yeah. So in this book in Grace of Truth. So I live in Virginia and not about an hour from Baltimore. And so my husband and then from Philadelphia. And a lot of these people are buried in Philadelphia because they came from Philadelphia originally. So we were visiting all the homes they grew up in so I could get a sense of, how they lived and got the addresses, because what you do is you have to do all that research to figure they lived in Poplar Grove and where was that then and ran around and did all that great stuff. And that's where I get a lot of the descriptions of, if they see a sunrise or if they're looking at a field, I kind of am there. But we go to the graveyards. And so we're looking for Ellen Wharton's grave. Oh, you'll love this. And it's in Bryn Mawr, if you're from that area. And so we go to Bryn Mawr. It's this little church. I said, "Oh, it can't be that hard." So we pull up and we see this little graveyard in front of this old church. And this is one of the cases where oftentimes they'll tell you what lot number and grid and row, and so you can find what section it is, so you can find it when you get to the cemetery. This particular cemetery didn't have any of that online or didn't have it available as to where she was buried. So we pull up. He's like, "Oh, cool. We'll find it right away. It's not going to be a big problem, right?" We pull up and then we see behind the church acres and acres and acres of headstones. And it's cold. It's December. And my husband's like, "There's no way we're going to find this woman. I'm not doing it." And so we get out of the car and I go, "Oh, come on, let's take a quick look." So we get out. I swear to goodness, Steve, I walk 3 rows back, 4 stones over. I go, "Here she is." He's like, "How did you do that?" "I don't know. She's calling me."
You
I
were you
swear to
were
God.
being you were being summoned.
Mm. I spent a lot of time in graveyards. So yeah, I like to go to the places and see so I can describe what it feels like walking down the street. And when I can visualize what it is to smell the place, to feel the place, to know what it is. And in the old homes, particularly in Vale of Doubt. I went to every one of them, have been in them, talked to the owners so I get a sense of how the rooms were laid out, just to know. It just makes it more real for me. So I can see it in my head and then I can write what I see.
Is that what helps you set tone? Because your story is wonderfully toned.
I sit in those places and just think, and oftentimes let the character come to me. In my
Mm.
first book, there is a chapter I wrote that I started writing. My husband was out of town. I started writing at 5:30, and I finished at 2 in the morning. I have no idea how I wrote it. I didn't write it. I believe that character, because I live in the house where the book was set, came out from someplace and possessed my body to write that chapter. And my editor would tell you it's the only chapter that doesn't sound like me. It just sounds like someone else wrote. She even asked me, "Who wrote this?" I said, "I did." She said, "There's no way. It doesn't sound like you." I said, and then I explained it to her, and she goes, "You're crazy. I don't even want to know." But I do think sitting in the place, walking in a place helps a writer visualize it. And I know I'm not the only one that writes this way. I know a lot of authors do that. I'm friends with Mark Sullivan, and I know he goes to the places that he writes about and experiences it, so he can share that with whoever with his reader.
Well, I've clearly spoken to a whole lot of creative people on the show, and I've known writers my whole career, and I've done a lot of research on creative people. And one of the things that is true for lots and lots of people that are inventors, scientists, creative people, artists, etc., is that they say that the work is not theirs; it comes through them.
It does.
Is
It's
That's what you're
crazy.
saying?
Exactly. I mean, I feel, I dream about these people. I mean, I do. They like in my dreams, and I wake up in the morning at 4 o'clock, and I'm like, okay, I got it, and I go write something down real quick, and then go back to bed, or I just get up and start typing. But I feel like they speak to me in my sleep sometimes. I solve mysteries in my head at night, and I'll say, oh, now I know why he did this. And what's really fun is, for me, we talk about research, is you get pieces of a puzzle, right? And it's always the why somebody did something. So, for
Hmm.
example, in my first book, Jack McCarty he's the protagonist, and he is the wealthiest man in the county in this period of time. It's 1816, 1820 time period. He's the wealthiest guy. He's unbelievably attractive. I mean, there's nothing. I mean, he's a lawyer. He's a politician. He's got everything going for him. And there's this woman. Her name is Lucinda Lee, and she is of the Lee family, and she is without a dowry. She's got the family name and the credentials, the pedigree, but her father died, left them with a lot of debts and not a penny. And she was having a hard time finding a husband, right? Because no dowry in that world, you're kind of up the creek. And Jack McCarty had asked her to marry him in real life, and she had turned him down. And for the life of me, I'm like, why would she turn him down? And why would you turn him down? And when I figured it out, I said, because he cheated on her, or he was doing something he shouldn't have been doing. He was, what I'm saying, he was not faithful. He did something, and lo and behold, that's what happened. And you have to read the book to figure out how it goes. But she does take him back, and they do get married eventually. But yeah, he had screwed around, and the asking the why behind certain behaviors really helps you sort of crack the code of what really drives a story, or what could really be a lightning point or a turning point or something really cool in a story, the twist, when you can answer the questions of why, when you don't have all the data, when you fill in that to me, with answering those questions to understand
And
people's motivation.
even more so in a mystery.
Yeah, exactly. I love that part. I mean, it drives me crazy. Why would he do this? The stupidest thing ever. Why would he do this? And then when you answer those questions, you go, or you come up with the glue in between. Then you create the twists around it. That's where a lot of these
Motive.
these twists come from. Exactly.
You need that motive, that is for sure. How do you structure your stories? I know you got lessons, I assume, from Anthony McCartan, but how do you sit down? Do you actually draft an outline?
Yeah,
What do you do
I
to structure
outline.
your story?
I outline. So I do what Anthony says, which is number one is, know your ending before you start, because if you don't know where you're going, you can't get there, right? So you have to know where you're
It's
going. So
just like taking a cross country trip.
yeah, so I write the ending first, And then he tells me,
Wait. Let's stop there a second. You write the ending first.
I do.
That's very interesting.
I
That's
write
super
backwards.
interesting.
I
That's
reverse
something
engineer it.
I've never done that where I write the ending first. I figure out the ending, but I don't write it until I get there. So that's
Oh, I write
interesting to
it, and
me.
now it's ugly, and it's going to change. It's going to twist, but I write.
That's
I have to
okay. That's
see
okay.
that last scene, and I write it first. And so I see how every book's going to end first, and I write it down. And I write it on my laptop, and it's ugly sometimes, but it's usually just dialogue and bits and pieces and stuff. But it's written. I've got it there, so I'm going there. And then, if your pig is going to fly in the Olympics, right? If that's the ending of your story, your pig makes the Olympics, he's going to fly. Then all the way up to that very last page, or close to that last page, there's no way that pig is flying in the Olympics. So you want your reader the whole time not to believe where you're going. And so in Grays of Truth, I've done that, right? You have no idea, right? You think you know what's going to, and it turns out maybe it's not that way. Veil of Doubt is the same way. All my stories, you don't think this guy's going to get the girl. You don't think this person's guilty. You don't think, you think this person is guilty, and then you find out something in the end. So that's another one of his tricks that I kind of do. So I reverse myself into those. So then I got to build a story that looks like, if my pig is going to fly at the end of the book, then there's no way that pig's going to fly all the way through. So my story is about how he wants to fly, but there's no way it's ever going to happen, and maybe he gets close and then it just falls apart. There's no way he's ever going to get there. And then, you find out in the end he actually does. And so that's sort of how I structure it. I try to do things in, sort of the classic. I used, when I first started writing, I bought Don Moss's, no, it's not, what's it called? Don Moss's, breakout novel book, but I also, the one about character arcs from, what's her last name? I can't think of her name right now. But, 25%, 50%, 75%, what are those big, huge turning points? You get committed to the story right up front at the 10% mark, but then, 25, 75, those places in between, making sure you've got those big turning points, those big events that, keep the reader wanting to turn the page. And so I craft my story that way. And what's funny, Steve, when I put those Post-it notes up, if I find they're all bunched up in one area, then I move them around to those marks in the book. And then I have to change the timing of some things, or have to change characters around in order to be able to make the pacing fit. That's when I begin to lose, quote, the truth of the story. I deviate from the truth, and I'll tell you in the end where I deviated in order to make that pacing work, to keep that action moving.
Is your development in the way you're talking about the same for all three books you've written and the ones you're going to write? Do you have the same process?
Yes, I do. But I've structured them a little differently. So the first two, well, the first one was done in three parts, that classic Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And then in Veil of Doubt, it worked out that I had 1 year, so I had four seasons, spring, summer, fall, winter. And so it
Mm-hmm.
became sort of a 4-act kind of play, because I did it around that. And then this last one, I had 5 years, and so I kind of did it like a 5-act sort of thing. And I made sure I moved some things around. So, for example, in Grays, there was 1 year, and I think it was 1870 or one of them, that wasn't a whole lot happening. I was like, can I just skip 1870? And my editor says no, or whatever year it was, or 69. You have got to make some things up there. So I moved some events around and have some more concentration there. I have a hard time with structure. When you ask me, what's my big challenge? Research is not it. It's how to structure that story. It's also where to start. I always know where I'm going to go, right? But where do I start?
That's a classic writer's dilemma. Aristotle's the one who said that, you want to start not before the story begins, and you want to carry on until the story ends and not go beyond that. But what does that mean? So where do you start? So what you're talking about is a classic writer's dilemma.
Right. So, talk about the two murder mysteries and Vale. I had the same thing. Do I start at the beginning? I go through each kid's death, and no. Then I'm in this woman's head too much. I don't want to be in her head. So I decided to start at the end. The last kid dies right at the beginning of the book, right? In Grays, I did it the other way. I started with the first death and moved all the way through, because I was in a different protagonist's head, and I wanted to see it from her perspective. But it took me a long time to get there. At first, I thought I was going to write it from, like I said, Jake's point of view, but then he was going to start too late, right? And then you wouldn't have any emotional tie to the victims. In Veil of Doubt, you don't really have an emotional tie to the little kids that were killed, because it wasn't about that. It was about something else. But in this book, I wanted you to feel what Jane Grey felt as each person dies throughout the story. And the only way you can do it is make you as a reader fall in love with the people that she loved, right? So that when those folks died, you felt her pain. That's what I try to do. How do I, I love the General Ketchum character in Grays of Truth, but how do I make you really love him too? I can't make you love him from his perspective. It was from how Jane felt about him, or how other people felt about him.
Sure. Do you think that as you're writing along, that you know that it's working, or do you need to finish the whole thing before you can look back and tell whether the story really works or not?
I know when it's working. I do, and I'll stop writing for a while. I'll just go, okay, I can't do it right now. I gotta back off. I gotta go, and that's why I have 3 books going on at the same time, because I start writing on another one, and then I'll come back to it. So I do that. But once I have that flow, once I know, I write it. And what happens, it's like building a building. It's a scaffolding, right? So I'll structure it. I'll start writing it, and then all of a sudden something's not working. So the one I'm working on now, the ending, even though I had it written, the things that led up to it seemed to feel like it was being dripped out in dribs of drabs. I'm like, that's not going to work. So I had to crush things together all toward a cataclysmic sort of point. And I think that happened in a lot of the stories. You sort of develop more twists as you go. I don't have them all worked out in the beginning, but I know instinctively that it's not working. I do. And then I'll send a chapter off, or I'll ask my husband to look at it, and he'll say, you're right, it's not working. I go, what do you think I need to do? He's like, kill this one, or kill that person, or, so I do tend to get feedback from other people, but I know if it's not working. I do.
So you know when it's not working, but does that mean you also know when it is?
I think so. It's trickier, because what may have great impact on me may not have great impact on a reader, right? I try to be more commercial. I try to think about, how an audience is going to read it. And even though I may like something, they may not like it. So I oftentimes I have a group of beta readers, about 10 people I know, but they're not my friends. These are people that I have in my book club that I run across this country. I don't know if you know, I have a 3,000 person book club that I run across the US.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it's called Read with Sharon, hashtag Read with
Read with
Sharon.
Sharon.
And anybody can join. It's free. And I pick all the books. We only read current release historical fiction. And I typically have the author that comes in and talks to the group at the end of the month, on the 4th Thursday of the month. And we usually have about 60 people that join us on a Zoom call. They come in and out. I've got some regulars that come in every month, and then we record it, and people can listen if they want. And it's great. We have Marjan Kamali this month for her book, The Lion Women of Tehran. Who we have coming up? I have Jenny Walsh coming up. I have Susan Meister coming up. I've had Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York, come in and join us. I started this during the pandemic, and it's been going gangbusters ever since. So, but I have about 10 readers from that group.
You clearly can't help yourself in continuing to make business.
I know. I love it. It's my favorite. Listen, you got enough time to sleep when you're in your grave. You got to be busy. So
I agree
yeah,
with you.
So I've got 10 readers from that group who I will shoot copies of things out and have them tell me honestly if it's working or not, sometimes when I'm really far along. But I think, I've got a good sense of it, I think. And then I have editors that really will beat me up by the head and shoulders and say, no, it's not working. And usually it's either tightening a chapter. My trouble, I have too many subplots sometimes, which a lot of authors do. And I'm grateful for my editors that say, no, what? So for example, in Grays of Truth, Jake Fry had a lot of trouble with the politicians in Baltimore, and he had a lot of problems with the gangs in Baltimore at the time. And I wanted to tell that gang story, and I was telling it. I had that in the original draft, and my editor came back and she said, it's distracting. It's got to go. And I fought her, and she was right. So we shortened it, but she was right. It was taking me down, and you would have lost the thread of the Jane Grey story. So I'm glad that she did that.
You needed to stick to your protagonist. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's sometimes a challenge. People have and I know a lot of my author friends who overwrite, and I won't tell them, because that's what they have their editors for. They won't be my friends anymore. But
Are you a big rewriter? Are you a big rewriter?
Oh my gosh, yes. I rewrite all the time. I
How
rewrite
many
as I
how many
go.
drafts?
How many drafts? I have no idea. I
Yeah.
do it as I go. I mean, so oftentimes I get lost in a story. You can't see the forest for the trees. You're kind of stuck in it, and it's hard to step back. And so I'll put it down for a day or two, and then I'll start reading it from beginning to end to see where I am and what I've missed. And then I'll spend 4 days, editing and rewriting phrases. And I like a lot of cadence in the writing. I like it to be sing-songy. Na 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 na. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like poetry and
Rhythm.
rhythm. And if I don't have that rhythm, then I get mad and I have to rewrite stuff. And so I spend a lot of time working on that rhythm. I think that's important.
So you work with an editor, I assume, yes?
Once I
You're
finish the
talking about your
manuscript,
editors.
yeah. So once I finish the manuscript, it goes over to my publishing company, and they have an outside independent development editor that will get a hold of it and then tear it apart. So, and usually I think I get 2 rounds with her, and then they do the classic line edit, copy edit, and everything else. But
Mhm.
and they'll tell you, listen, you haven't got enough this in there, or you need more of that, and then I have to go back and write it. And they usually give me a month or so to fix those issues, which I can do. I
A
write pretty quickly.
and has it always been very helpful?
Oh my gosh, yes, love my editor. Yeah,
Mhm.
um,
So you
I
need
couldn't do
that.
without it. I mean, and I really get upset when I read some of the very famous authors, and it looks to me like sometimes, and it happens. I told Anthony this. I read his last book. I said, dude, you need to pay your editor more or listen to them more often. He's like, what's wrong? I said, you overwrite the damn thing. I'm sorry, but it happens to all of us, though. We do. I mean, because we love the story and we know so much about the topic. You want to put more of it in there, and then
Of course.
sometimes it gets lost, and so it's tough for someone to tell someone that the baby's ugly, but I rather for my editor to tell me it's ugly than my readers to tell me it's ugly.
Well, it's not sometimes it's not just ugly, it's you go back to Faulkner's famous maxim about you have to be willing to kill your darlings. Sometimes it's stuff you're writing that's brilliant, but doesn't fit in the story, and you've gotta get
Right.
rid of it,
What
you
I
know?
said, I was writing an article for someone not long ago, and I said, the key to the ugly balance of writing is you have to know when to kill your sacred cows and then which
Mhm.
ones to save. And which ones to
That's
save.
true.
And what I love about my publisher is that a lot of I have a lot of friends who tell me they get so frustrated when they write, and they have an editor who's like all of 30 years old, and we're all in our whatever we are, and we're more sophisticated, and we got some 30-year-old telling us what's going to sell as opposed to what we think is going to sell. And my publisher is really good about having people who are a lot more experienced, that really kind of understands what I want to call a more sophisticated read and writing
Wh
like that I write.
what do you think that you do now that you didn't do in the beginning that's a big, helpful change? What did you do in the beginning that's you eventually learned didn't work well and now you do differently?
Um, Adverbs. Um,
Adverbs.
I used a lot of adverbs when I first started writing, and I wrote a lot of expository language, used a lot of expository language, and I did a lot of telling and not showing. And
Mhm.
so I've learned really fast because no adverbs. Very rarely do I use an adverb, and I try to show versus tell, um, and and just not a lot of. I use a lot of action and dialogue to sort of tell the story as opposed to that back writing. I don't think I would like writing first person, for an example, because I think that's an excuse for you to use expository language, because you get to talk about what's in someone's head, and instead of it, I don't want to be in their head. I want to be in their actions. I want to see how they react and how they feel. Um,
So for the second time in this show, I'm going to say to you, you should write screenplays because showing and not telling is the main maxim for most screenwriters. You have to learn to show and not to tell. And that if you can do that through action, you would make a very fine screenwriter. That's
all
why I'm
right, I'm
saying it.
going to talk. I have
Or
my daughter-in-law is a screenwriter out in LA, so we'll see. Oh, I don't know.
You've clearly gotten lots of notes over time from various people. You are open and willing to hear those notes,
Oh
which
yeah.
some writers are afraid of, but you are open and willing to them. How do you handle those notes? Do you take every note? Do you consider them? Do you immediately get rid of some? How do you handle notes?
So you talk about in a manuscript when I get it back?
Right, when you get or even somebody like you give it to Anthony to read and he gives you thoughts and notes. How do you handle notes? Do you accept them all? Do you immediately knee-jerk react some of them away? How do you handle notes?
Well, if it's something really stupid, like really stupid, I'll go, oh my god, that's stupid. But then oftentimes I think, wait a minute, maybe if it's not so stupid, maybe I'm the stupid one, so I should think about it. Um, but no, I listen. I read. I listen. If they have that question, then that means a reader could have that question. So I take them all seriously, even though sometimes I go, oh, you got to be kidding me. Where I get angry, I get agitated is when an editor is reading the book and then says, wait a minute, so and so, such. And I go, wait a minute. If you've read the book, you'd see that that was actually explained 3 chapters ago. So either it's too subtle or you missed it or what have you. So that kind of bothers me. I guess the one note I don't like, and I had this from one of my agents, which I don't have anymore, is when they ask me to change something that's not in character for a character. So, for example, I've had a situation where Jack McCarty, who is this sort of flippant rake, he's putting notches in his bedposts, kind of thing of his captures or whatever you want to call it. And she suggested that we needed to get him more sentimental and that maybe when he's riding his horse past a tree, he remembers his first kiss there. I go, are you kidding me? He's not that kind of guy. He's that's not how he's wired. You don't understand. You're not getting into the character. But then I thought to myself, wait a minute. Maybe she's thinking that because I haven't done a good enough job of showing what an impassionate, shallow kind of guy he is right now. And so just the fact that I thought it irritated me at the time, but I thought, okay, then maybe I need to deepen the character so that they don't think that. So like you said, everything has a purpose. Everything is a question I ask myself, why? Why is she saying this? Why is she recommending this? Maybe it's not what she's saying that's the problem. Maybe it's the reason why she's saying it. I haven't done something. Um, so I typically listen to everything. I don't necessarily accept it. And I ask myself, is the story better with the recommendation included in the note, or does it just detract? And and then sometimes I may not have the answer. I may be too close to it, so I'll ask somebody else to read it and get their opinion. And I tend to listen to my beta readers. If they tell me, she's right, or no, she's way off, and that's how I flow. And some editors, particularly there's one in particular I have at my publishing company who I respect. And whatever she says, 95 times out of 100, I'm going to do because she's just so good, you know. And
Well,
you
I
learn to
I
work with
think
people.
it's great that you are open and willing to listen to notes and to consider them and then to try to figure out whether they actually work or not. Those are all good things for a writer to have as part of their toolkit, as opposed to any number of, I think, newish writers sometimes tend to feel protective of the work and push back and don't want anyone to touch it. You, on the other hand, are open, and I think that that's exactly the way it should be.
I'm telling you, my entire career before I did this was, this is the attitude. You can either listen to me, and I would do a lot of the reviews for other writers as well, and do what we say, or not. And if you listen to yourself, you can have the government or the client tell you why you lost at the debrief, and you'll find it's the exact reason why I was telling you need to make the change, right? So if it makes the work better, if it makes the work win, if it sells, that's what's most important, because you can have the best story in the world, but if no one reads it, if no one buys it, it's just your story. But it's the world's story if the world reads it, and the world's only going to read it if you write it in a way in which they receive it.
I think that's extremely valuable information. I've been having absolutely one of the most fascinating conversations with Sharon Virts, the historical novelist, for close to an hour now, and we're going to wind the show down a little bit. And I'm wondering, in all of these experiences you've had, whether with your government business or writing books or whatever, can you share with us a story that's either weird, quirky, offbeat, strange, or just plain funny beyond the ones you've already given us?
Well, you asked me this, and I mean, I've got plenty of in business. My gosh, I could go in for hours about some of the stuff I've had to deal with in business. But in terms of just kind of quirky, I think I told you earlier on, I do these walking tours around town to explain where so and so happened, and there's this large. We always end up in this very large graveyard, and I spend a lot of time in that graveyard. And so when I was writing my second book, I would actually go out there. It was during the pandemic. Everyone's got a pandemic book, and I would sit on the grave of one of my protagonists, and I'd talk to him. I'd say, "Okay, pal, why did you do this, or why did you argue that? Why in the world?" And okay, that's what I did. And so I was out there in the graveyard. This is recently, like this past summer, and I get lost out there. So what I would do is, those like little pink flags you use to mark, like Miss Utility uses to mark lines and stuff. Those little
Sure.
flags they put in the ground with little. So I would take those out there and I would mark everywhere I needed to turn when I took my walking tour and whose grave was where. And and so I'm out there doing that, and this guy named Tony, he's the guy that manages the big graveyard out there, and he comes out there and he says, "You're the one putting these little pink flags on the graves." And I said, "Hi, Tony, how are you?" He goes, "What are you doing?" "I use pink flags to mark where I'm about to dig a grave, and they're all over my graveyard." I said, I, I put them out yesterday. I'll get them up tonight after I finish the tour. He was fussing at me. He says, "I swear to God, I'm out here seeing how many graves do I have to dig? They're everywhere." So he was upset about that. And he says to me, "So help me God, Sharon." He says, "If you don't get all those pink flags out of my graveyard, I'm not going to let you come in here and talk to dead people anymore." He thinks I'm a loon.
Does he mind if you use a different color?
No, no. I was gonna make sure I pick them all up, but it was just, he thinks he's got all these graves to dig. Someone's put pink flag. Like, I'm losing my mind. How many graves do I have to? And then he says, I'm not gonna let you come sit on people's graves and talk to dead people anymore. You must think I'm nuts. So I thought that was pretty funny. It's kind of quirky. I'm the crazy lady that sits on people's graves and talks to dead people. Okay.
Well, I think it's great that you have no fear of the graveyard.
I love a good graveyard. I just do. And I just think that, however you get in touch with characters, I don't think I'm creative enough to write a character that didn't live once. I like to have something to go from. I love that mystery of unwinding them. And I hope that one day when I get to meet them, they can tell me how wrong or how right I was. Or if they, even if I got them wrong, which I'm sure I did, they can at least say, "Hey, but you made a good effort. Thank you for bringing me back alive," or something. Who knows how that's going to end.
Well, that's a wonderful way to look at it, and hopefully you will get to meet those
Yeah,
people
hopefully.
someday.
Well, it depends on which way
Uh,
we go, or which
uh,
character.
if that's true, that's absolutely true. All right, so last question for you today, Sharon. You've already given us a very significant amount of advice along the way, but I'm wondering if you have a solid piece of advice that you like to give to those who are starting out in the business, or maybe they're in a little bit trying to get to that next place.
Yeah, for me, I think the best advice is that you have to write the characters and the stories that you love. If you don't fall in love with them, no one else will. And a lot of people have these great ideas about stories, but I think they're really plot driven. But at the end of the day, it's about the people. They need to be people driven, and you have to really know and love that character. And if you don't, then you can't. It's very hard for you to convince anybody else to. It's kind of like the whole love yourself thing. You got to love your guy or your gal, and then we as readers will find out that they love them too. And then the last thing about that too is that I was going to say this, and I think I already said it. Don't be afraid to fight for your sacred cows, but also know which ones you got to kill off. And that's a really tough balance, especially when you love your characters and you love your story. And I think people have to be open to do that because, again, if you don't write a story that people are going to buy, then it's just your story. It's not the story for everyone else to enjoy. And I guess lastly on the whole subject is you got a lot of patience. This is a business that it's a hurry up and wait business. Takes forever to write a book, and then you wait and wait, wait, and the rejects you get, I'm sure you've had many authors say, how many times has a story been rejected or you've been rejected, and you just have to keep at it and don't give up. But you have to also be willing to change, in order to be able to make your stories more commercial. And I think
Well,
that's
there's
really hard for a lot of people.
it's very hard for a lot of people, and it's extremely wise advice because uh, the business is not uh, based to based on everybody gets in. It's based on who gets to earn their way in. And so that can take a long time sometimes. Sometimes it takes a long time to develop.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that everybody. I have so many people that come up to me. Oh, you're a writer. You're an author. I want to write a book. I'm like, well, good luck. No, I mean, but a lot of folks that say they've started writing a book, and that's great, but you got to finish it. And you can't just. It's not the old days where, and I wasn't around in those old days. I'm sure you have that experience. I don't. I was working in a different industry, but where you can just put a concept out and people just your publisher will just buy it or whatever. You have to actually your first book. It's got to be completely written. It's going to be perfect, 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 and to sell it. I mean, it's really hard. Now, I am fortunate. I can float an idea with my publisher. I could give them 3 paragraphs. They're like, go do it. And it's done. I mean, because they love me and we work together well. But if I'm not selling books, they're not gonna keep me either. There's that whole thing.
Well, you've earned their trust.
Right, but that's not the same thing for some new writer when they first get started. Unfortunately they don't get to sell the way they don't get to write the way we do. They have to write the whole
Of
thing,
course.
and it's got to be perfect. And it's really hard to do. My first book was tough, and then selling it was tough. I mean, the whole thing was just tough. It was awful,
Well,
actually.
you said that you have folks that come up and say, "I want to be a writer." I've had many people say that to me. There is a huge difference between someone that wants to be a writer and someone who writes. And I've always said the only difference between a non-writer and a writer is that the writer writes. And the only difference between a writer and a professional writer is the professional has somehow figured out how to get paid. And so if you want to be a writer, don't say you want to be a writer, go be a writer. Just write.
Right. Right. Yeah, and write every day and you get better and better. I mean, that's the thing too. I mean, I thought I was a great writer when I started this, and then I looked at my first manuscript. Oh my gosh, the first look at it, if I went back and look at it now, the very first draft of it, oh my God, I mean, it's awful because I used too many adverbs and too much expository, too much this, and you just don't know. And that's the thing too is, don't be afraid to get some great books and how to use them. And Don Moss's book, Breakout Novel, is a great one. Story maps, all those things you can learn from other people and use them. And get a literary coach if you can afford one. Get someone to work with you. I did. It wasn't just Anthony. I did hire a professional literary coach for the first book because I didn't know
Well,
what I was doing.
it's always helpful to have either a mentor or someone who knows what they're doing coaching you along the way. That's always helpful because most people don't know what they're doing as
Right.
they're proceeding. In fact, some people that know what they're doing don't know what they're doing, but that's a whole other issue.
It's true too.
Sharon Virts, I cannot thank you enough for your time, your energy, and your wisdom today. This has been an absolutely spectacular hour plus on StoryBeat. And, you need to get a little energy.
Oh,
You are a very passionate, energetic human. It's fantastic to talk to somebody who's so passionate about their work. And so I greatly appreciate it. And I thank you greatly for your time.
well, and thank you for having me, Steve. I've had a blast.
And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.